after 9. I wonder if you're one of the millions of people who start each day with a cup of coffee. Well, according to experts, that's fine, as long as you don't exceed more than 6 cups a day. If you do, you're in danger, literally, of poisoning yourself. Well, we've been joined by scientist and broadcaster Brian Ford. Morning to you, Brian.
Morning to you.
Is that right? Am I talking through my hat, or is that true?
No, dear boy, through the mouth. It's just a fleshy bit of the odd part of the face. No, the point about it is, it's not actually so much caffeine addiction as habituation. People get used to taking it in. And it's certainly true that if you were to take, say, 1,000 milligrams of caffeine a day, that you could actually be poisoning yourself. Now, 1,000 milligrams of caffeine doesn't really mean much to people, but in a strong cup of coffee there could be 150 milligrams. So say 6 or 8 big, strong cups of coffee, or a dozen cups of tea. You can, though, have even more caffeine in tea than in coffee.
A lot of people would say that there's no caffeine at all in tea, but there is, isn't there?
Oh, there's caffeine even in drinking chocolate.
Yes, I see. So if you say you get sort of poisoned by it, or whatever, what actually happens to you?
Well, it's a kind of what one would call a catch-22. The difficulty is that people tend to drink tea or coffee because they feel a bit edgy, a bit anxious, a bit uptight. They'll say, I don't feel too good today, so I'll pour myself a cup of tea, settle down, and then I'll feel better. Now, caffeine poisoning causes a hyperactivity. It makes you anxious. It makes you edgy. It can give you a tremor. It can even give you palpitations in sufficiently severe doses. And the problem is then that you're actually giving yourself the kind of symptoms that you're taking the drink to get rid of.
My goodness. So let's establish first of all what caffeine is then, exactly.
It's just a crystalline chemical. It is a white powder in the pure state, which has been used for thousands of years as a mild stimulant, and it certainly acts as a stimulant.
Where does it come from originally then?
Well, caffeine means in caffea, and caffea is the Latin name for coffee. And it was originally described as an extract, a purified extract of coffee beans. But it's since been found that it occurs in tea, it also occurs in drinking chocolate, and it's used in a number of preparations that people might buy at the chemist that they'd never imagine would contain anything like caffeine.
So if, for instance, I had 10 cups of coffee this morning, what could I be feeling like at lunchtime?
Horizontal, I should think.
Oh, really?
I mean, 10 cups of coffee in a day would be as much as anybody really ought to drink. At that level, you could almost certainly detect the signs of caffeine poisoning in the average person. And some, of course, are more susceptible to the effects of caffeine than others are.
But so why has it become such a social event then? I mean, it in fact is, in a way, a danger, isn't it?
The danger comes from the overindulgence, when people just quickly make coffee and they guzzle it down. But the social event which you talk of is actually very important. I mean, if somebody comes to your house, you don't just want to say, come in, sit down, what have you come for? It's much nicer to be able to say, let me put the kettle on, and you chat. And then if there's a little hiatus in the conversation, to say, let me top up your cup of tea. It becomes a kind of a social thing to do. And people who are worried about taking too much caffeine could very easily simply serve infusions, like a chamomile or any of these other herbal teas which people like to drink. I mean, the ritual is still there, but there's less hazard to their health.
Should one perhaps cut it out altogether?
Good Lord, no. The terrible thing is, you see, that here we are talking about the experts who get you worried about too much caffeine, but the problem is that they're simply giving a double dose of the same symptoms. I mean, if you're going to turn and stentoriously say to somebody, you should give up tea and coffee because it makes you anxious, the method of telling them that is going to make them anxious anyhow. And I would say to people, there's not the least need to give up tea and coffee, but if you wonder why it is that you sometimes feel very anxious, and you've got a bit of a headache, and you can't settle down, and you try to cure that by taking tea or by taking coffee, that could actually be the cause. What I'd like to do is to inform people that that might be part of their problem. The last thing I'd want to do is to frighten the willies out of them. I think that would be more than counterproductive.
No, you mentioned a headache there. You can get a headache, can you?
You can, and also you can get a headache as you withdraw from caffeine as well. When people give up regular doses of caffeine, one of the withdrawal symptoms is a nasty headache. And you know as well as I do that if you get a nasty headache, you would never associate it with having given up coffee or tea. So to actually cut it out altogether could also make you slightly ill.
It's a bit depressing, isn't it?
No, not at all. Just have a nice cup of coffee and settle down and relax.
Okay, what else is caffeine in, just so we're on our guard?
Well, do bear in mind that you don't hear about it over here so much, but in the States, many of the soft drinks like 7-Up, say, never contained any caffeine. caffeine in their world because it's a strong selling point. And sales of the Cokes have been dropping in the States because they contain caffeine. There's caffeine even in Lucozade, I was told this morning. It seems quite astonishing, doesn't it? Not a lot. There's a bit in things like headache tablets. But you'd have to take a handful of headache tablets to give you the same amount of caffeine as in a strong cup of tea. I mean, it's nothing to...
So basically, the watchword, as with most things, is moderation in all things.
Absolutely. Tea and coffee included.